The Great Depression of the 1930s was one of the most challenging times in American history. With the stock market crash of 1929, millions of families lost their savings, jobs disappeared overnight, and poverty became a harsh reality. Food, something we take for granted today, was often scarce, and what people ate depended on creativity, resourcefulness, and pure survival. Families learned to stretch every dollar, substitute expensive ingredients, and create meals from whatever was available. The dinner table of the Great Depression tells a powerful story not of luxury, but of resilience. In this documentary, we'll explore what Americans really ate during the Great Depression, from strange recipes born out of necessity to simple meals that became staples of survival. Some of these dishes have vanished from modern kitchens, while others remain comfort foods even today. This isn't just about food ieds, about the story of endurance, ingenuity, and the will to survive when times were at their hardest. 1. Breadlines and soup kitchens. One of the most iconic images of the Great Depression was the breadline. Hungry men, women, and children stood in long queues, waiting for free food distributed by churches, charities, or government relief programs. Soup kitchens, often funded by local communities or run by organizations like the Salvation Army, became a lifeline for millions. The food was simple, thin: soup, bread, maybe a cup of coffee if you were lucky. It wasn't enough to fill a stomach, but it was better than nothing. Soup kitchens served whatever was available, often watered-down stews made from donated vegetables, bones, or scraps of meat. The goal was to feed as many mouths as possible with limited resources. Though humiliating for many, breadlines symbolized the communal spirit of survival. They reminded people that, even in the darkest times, no one was completely alone. These kitchens kept millions from starvation and gave hope to those who had lost everything. 2. The rise of Hoover Stew. Named after President Herbert Hoover, who was blamed for the Depression, Hoover Stew was a common dish served in soup kitchens and homes alike. It was made from whatever cheap ingredients could be found: macaroni or pasta, canned tomatoes, hot dogs or leftover meat, and sometimes beans or corn. The stew had no fixed recipe, was more a concept than a dish. Families added whatever scraps were available, stretching meals to feed more mouths. Hot dogs, cheap and filling, became a common source of protein. The mixture simmered together into a hearty stew, providing warmth and comfort in difficult times. Though mocked at the time, Hoover Stew has become a symbol of Depression-era resilience. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled empty stomachs. Some families even remembered it fondly, passing down the recipe as a reminder of survival and thriftiness. 3. Mock foods. Creativity born of necessity. When ingredients were too expensive, Americans invented mock foods. Meat was scarce, so mock chicken might be made from beans, crackers, or rice shaped into patties. Desserts like mock apple pie used Ritz crackers with cinnamon and sugar to mimic apples, which had become unaffordable. Even cakes were reimagined. Eggs, milk, and butter were costly luxuries, so housewives created depression cake or Wacky cake, which used vinegar and baking soda for leavening and oil instead of butter. These cakes were eggless, milkless, and butterless, yet still surprisingly delicious. Mock foods weren't about taste as much as survival. They gave families the illusion of eating something special when in reality they were stretching pennies. These recipes are powerful examples of American ingenuity in the face of hardship. 4. Beans, potatoes, and cabbage. The everyday staples beans, potatoes, and cabbage became the backbone of Depression-era diets. They were cheap, filling, and versatile. A sack of dried beans could feed a family for weeks. Potatoes were boiled, fried, mashed, or turned into soups. Cabbage could be eaten raw, cooked, or fermented into sauerkraut. Beans, in particular, were considered the poor man's meat. They provided much-needed protein when meat was unaffordable. Families cooked large pots of beans flavored with salt pork, onions, or whatever seasonings they had on hand. Leftovers were refried or mixed into stews the next day. Potatoes and cabbage were just as important. Simple meal might be boiled potatoes with cabbage and a bit of gravy, or fried potatoes with onions. Though repetitive, these meals kept people alive. For many, beans, potatoes, and cabbage were the difference between hunger and survival. 5. Cornmeal and the return of old traditions. Cornmeal, cheap and widely available, became a Depression staple. Cornbread, corn mush, and fried cornmeal cakes appeared on dinner tables across America. These foods harken back to pioneer and Civil War diets, showing how people returned to older traditions in times of hardship. Cornmeal mush was especially common. Families boiled cornmeal with water or milk, creating a thick porridge that could be eaten hot for breakfast or fried into slices for dinner. It was bland, but it was filling. Many rural families also relied on homegrown corn, grinding it into meal themselves. Corn not only fed people but also livestock, making it one of the most important Depression-era crops. Cornmeal dishes symbolize the connection between America's past and its present struggles: simple, rustic, and sustaining. 6. Victory gardens and foraging. When store-bought food was too expensive, many families turned to their backyards. Gardens became a lifeline, producing vegetables like carrots, onions, potatoes, beans, and tomatoes. Even in cities, families grew food in small plots or community gardens. People also foraged for wild foods: dandelion greens, berries, nuts, and even wild game when available. Nothing was wasted. Chickens provided eggs, goats provided milk, and home-canned goods filled pantry shelves for the winter. These practices weren't just about survival, they brought families together. Children learned gardening, women canned vegetables, and men hunted or fished when possible. Self-reliance became not just a necessity, but a point of pride. Gardens and foraging reminded Americans that even in the harshest times, nature could still provide. 7. Strange meals and odd combinations. Desperation often led to strange meals. Ketchup sandwiches, made from bread spread with ketchup, became a quick snack when meat was unavailable. Onion sandwiches, bread with a slice of raw onion, were another odd but common food. Liver and other organ meats, once considered undesirable, became important sources of nutrition. Families cooked liver and onions, or used kidneys, hearts, and gizzards in stews. Another popular dish was milk toast, toasted bread soaked in warm milk, often with a sprinkle of sugar. It was cheap, soft, and filling. These foods may sound unappetizing today, but for Depression-era families, they were lifesavers. They show how creativity and necessity shaped even the simplest meals. 8. Government relief foods. By the mid-1930s, the government began providing relief in the form of basic food commodities: flour, rice, beans, cheese, lard, and powdered milk. These ingredients allowed families to bake bread, make simple stews, or prepare filling side dishes. Some of the most famous relief foods included government cheese, which became a household staple, and large sacks of flour that families used to make bread, pancakes, and biscuits. Even the cloth sacks were reused for clothing, aprons, or curtains. Though limited, these government rations provided stability in households where money had completely run out. For many families, this was the only consistent source of food during the Depression years. 9. Regional foods and cultural survival. Food traditions varied depending on where you lived. In the South, collard greens, cornbread, and black-eyed peas were common. In the Midwest, hearty stews, potatoes, and bread-filled tables. Immigrant families kept their food traditions alive with modified recipes. Italian families stretched pasta with vegetables, while Mexican-American families relied on tortillas, beans, and rice. Regional food was not just about survival, but also about identity. Even during hardship, food remained a way to preserve culture and family bonds. Families adapted, but they didn't forget where they came from. This blending of survival foods and cultural traditions helped shape modern American cuisine, showing how resilience was expressed through what people cooked and ate. The legacy of Depression-era foods. The Great Depression forever changed the way Americans thought about food. Scarcity taught people to value every scrap, to waste nothing, and to make the most of what they had. Meals were no longer about indulgence, but about survival and family togetherness. Some Depression-era foods faded into history, like ketchup sandwiches or Hoover Stew, while others, like Wacky cake or cornbread, are still enjoyed today. These foods remind us of the resilience of ordinary people during extraordinary times. The Depression was not just an economic crisis, it was a lesson in endurance. What Americans ate during those years tells us a story of hardship, but also of strength, community, and creativity. In the simplest meals, we find the richest history of survival.